So I want to thank Indiana's unofficial, the honorary consul of Indiana to Illinois, Chris Dudley, for helping me with this introduction, but I also don't want you to blame her for any of its shortcomings. I don't know, you think, what is the greatest compliment that Illinois can pay Indiana? And there's always some good-natured ribbing back and forth. Nothing like what you get between Wisconsin and Minnesota, but that's another story. And I think the greatest compliment that can be paid to Indiana by Illinois is to recognize that it was under Thomas Lincoln's very devout Baptist background that Abraham Lincoln learned his Bible in Indiana. That is where in his formative years he spent Sunday after Sunday in church and reading. And we know what that meant, not just to Illinois, but to Indiana and indeed the entire nation. Going the other way, it was an Illinoisan who had the privilege of portraying the Milan basketball coach in one of the greatest movies ever made, Hoosiers, and that, of course, was Gene Hackman from Danville, Illinois. Let's give them Abraham Lincoln, Gene Hackman. Mike Pence distinguished himself early in life as a radio talk show host and struck a very responsive chord with folks throughout central Indiana, such that when a vacancy turned up in the United States House of Representatives, he almost went by acclamation. And in the House of Representatives, his peers honored him by suggesting he enter the leadership track as opposed to the committee track. So in the House of Representatives, on the Republican side, he held the very important position of chairman of the House Republican Caucus. And it was there he had a major role in defining Republicanism and its policy responses to the issues that beset us all, state, municipality, or the federal government. When later there was an opportunity to run for governor, Mike Pence stepped up, and he has been putting points on the board ever since. And that's why we're very pleased here at the City Club to welcome Mike today and to hear what he's got to say about the future of Indiana and the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, a big City Club welcome.
Thank you. Wow, I'm very humbled by that wonderful introduction, Chris. Thank you so much. To Jay and Paul, thank you for the invitation to this historic group, the longest consistent civic organization and forum in the history of the city of Chicago. I am honored to have a chance to address the City Club of Chicago, and I'm grateful for that wonderful introduction and that wonderful hospitality. I'm also grateful to be joined by a number of Hoosiers. I feel like having been introduced by the designated Republican that's here, it's nice that they let a few Hoosiers in the room. I do want to single a couple of them out. Now, Senator Rick Niemeyer, Representative Mike Ellsworth, Representative Ed Soliday, and Mayor Karen Freeman Wilson of the great city of Gary, Indiana. Thank you all for coming here. Good to see my friends. And to members of the state legislature from Illinois, I'm honored by your presence as well, and just grateful for the warm hospitality that's extended here. I'm especially grateful because, you know, as Indiana governor, to be invited by civic leaders in Chicago, given our state's playful penchant to poach business from. It's an act of grace on your part. I recognize that, and I'm all for advertising Indiana, but the caution, high taxes ahead, billboards, the pension tax drop, state line 16 miles ahead. Well, we've been buying a lot in the Crane's Chicago Business Magazine. The personal favorite was "You Had Me at Balanced Budget." And the one that's, if AAA is wrong, I don't want to be right. And maybe the harshest one was in the Crane Chicago Business that said, "Envy is a sin, but moving to Indiana isn't." So especially for that reason, I want to say thank you. Thank you for making me feel so welcome and letting other Hoosier policymakers in the room. All kidding aside, the truth is I have enormous respect for this great city. And it may come as a surprise to you, the bond that my little family feels to this city is real and it's personal. I couldn't help but do a little. I was a history major when I was going to school, Chris, and down on the Ohio River. Went to Hanover College. It's the oldest small college in the state of Indiana. We like to say it sits on the edge of the Ohio. It was founded on a bluff in 1827. It's been run that way ever since. It's kind of worked its way across the room there. I know but as a history major, I couldn't help but pull from a speech that Teddy Roosevelt gave in April of 1899, before he would step onto the national stage. He spoke at the Hamilton Club. It was a few years before the City Club of Chicago would be started. But he said words that I think still speak into this moment today, and I hope they touch your heart. Teddy Roosevelt said, "In speaking to you, men of the great city of the West, men and women of the state that gave the country Lincoln and Grant, men and women who preeminently and distinctly embody all that is most American in the American character." He said, "You people of Chicago have made this great city. You people of Illinois have done your share, more than your share, to make America great." And Roosevelt was right. But I must tell you that my connection to Chicago is not just because of the immense history of this city and its importance, but it's also very personal. I really owe a debt of gratitude to Chicago that springs from my own personal history. When my grandfather got off a boat on Ellis Island in about 1923, he caught a train to Chicago, and he drove a bus in this city for about 40 years. Yeah, my mom and dad both grew up on the south side of Chicago, down around 55th and Honorary. And in fact, we've got family that goes to school and lives and works here in this community today. And my oldest brother, who is with me today, who is a Loyola grad, wearing exactly the same tie I'm wearing, actually just managed to marry his daughter off into the Doolin family, and Greg and Suzanne and Chris and Lauren are here today, and they're expecting their very first child. We just got that word. We'll be extending that baby dual citizenship for Indiana and Illinois. So it's very personal when I'm in this city. I feel very at home. My story is I was born and raised by two big city kids down in a really small town in southern Indiana. We grew up in a little house on 31st Street. My dad was in the gas station business, and we had a cornfield in the backyard. But in so many respects, particularly this time of year, the Pence family would find themselves in the back of a station wagon making the long trip up what was then Highway 31 and making our way to the south side of Chicago, to hearth and home and family and friends. So it's a blessing to be here in this time of year with all of you and reflect on those deep memories. My story is I grew up in that small town. I took a degree from the aforementioned college. I studied law. I worked in radio and television, and then I went off to the Congress, fulfilling a boyhood dream of being the congressman from my small town. And then just a few short years ago, had the extraordinary privilege of being elected to be the governor of the state that I love. And I have to tell you, I served in Congress for 12 years, and if I only had 12 years left to live, I'd want to live it as a member of Congress, because that was the longest 12 years of my life. I want to talk to you today in the time that we have. Chris asked me before, he said, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I really do want to talk about the promise of the states. I want to talk about the fact that, the truth is, we haven't had government as good as our people in our nation's capital under the management of either political party for quite a while now. But it's been different at the state level, in states all across the country, including in our state next door in Indiana. And I want to talk to you about that, particularly as your state now will move through a transition of new leadership. In a time of promise and opportunity and a changing of directions, I want to reflect respectfully as a neighbor about our experience in Indiana and how I believe that that may inform all that you're doing here. Because we could spend our time dwelling on all of the list of failings at the national level, but I'd rather today focus on the promise and the opportunities of the state, and to really, during this time for your state, encourage you and give you hope and maybe a challenge to step into this moment. In a word, I want you to be encouraged. Because as much as we love competition here in the Big Ten, basketball, football, jobs, right? I truly do believe in my heart of heart that the Midwest holds the key to a boundless American future in this century. The heartland is where we make things and we grow things. And when the Midwest is working, America is growing. There's an old proverb that says, iron sharpens iron. So one person sharpens another. And I think what's true of people is also true of states and of governments. And it is my fond hope that as you look next door, you'll sense that sharpening and the opportunity. Because I think that's happening here in the heartland of the country as common sense reform principles have been being put into effect. You see, I come from what we like to call a state that works. We have a balanced budget, AAA bond rating. We've been able to increase funding for roads and schools at the same time that I signed into law the largest state tax cut in Indiana history. We now have the largest educational voucher program in the United States of America, 75 charter schools, and the results speak for themselves. Test scores are up, graduation rates are up, and in the recent Nation's Report Card, known as the NAEP, we had the second best improvement of any state in the country, right after Tennessee, in math and reading scores for 4th and 8th graders. Now, I didn't come here to brag on Indiana. I didn't just come here to brag on Indiana. But I really came to encourage you, and encourage you with the progress that's being made in our state and in other similarly led states around the country. And to urge you in this great city, with its great and rich history, in this time of transition and progress, to go and do likewise. Because I will tell you, it is central to my thinking. After 12 years in Congress and 2 years as governor of the great state of Indiana, I truly believe that the cure for what ails this country will come more from our nation's state capitals than it ever will from our nation's capital. But to accomplish that, we've got to do a couple of things, and I want to leave you with that word today. First, I think we as a people here in the heartland need to wean ourselves off of that kind of Washington-centered notion that every problem should find its solution in Washington, D.C. I mean, I have to tell you that I really do believe people all across this country are tired of the Washington knows best mentality that we've sensed really under leadership of both parties in recent years. Ronald Reagan probably said it best, and yes, I know where he's from. And it ain't California. Ronald Reagan said in his first inaugural address, one of the first things he said to the American people was that it was important to remember that the states created the federal government. The federal government didn't create the states. And he said that he was going to make it his intention. The very first thing he told the American people was he was going to make it his intention to restore the proper balance between the rights afforded and responsibilities of the national government and those reserved to the states and to the people. This principle of federalism was truly central to President Reagan. And I believe it needs to be central to the national debate today in this country. Because in the last 75 years, it's probably accurate to say that state governments in many respects, according to policymakers in Washington, have been relegated in some measure to territorial outposts of the national government. But that's not what they were designed to be. I mean, states were really designed to be those laboratories of innovation and reform and creativity where good ideas could rise and flow. You know, I'll never forget when I first learned that President Reagan had come in 1982, about a year after his inaugural address, to speak as the only president to ever speak before the Indiana General Assembly. He came and he spoke on one topic, and that was federalism. And the speech itself now appears on the wall in our General Assembly, and it holds up to this very day. It's a powerful speech. And he came and he announced a Federalism Commission in the first year in office. He recommended some 36 different federal programs that could be extended back down to the states with both the resources and the flexibility to innovate. And I came to find out that he actually made that speech in other state legislatures around the country during that time. I made my way to see his old Attorney General and his old friend Ed Meese in Washington before I got elected governor, and I sat down with General Meese. And I said, I wanted to ask you about a speech that President Reagan gave in Indianapolis in 1982 on federalism. I said, you probably don't remember it. He said, Mike, I remember it like it was yesterday. I said, really? And I said, well, what was that about? He said, was that just, he just wanted to give a speech on that, so we're going through Indianapolis. And he said, no, he looked at me and he said, Mike, he cared as much about restoring federalism and the prerogatives of states as he did about rebuilding the military and standing up to the Soviet Union. And I looked at him and I said, well, why was that? And Ed looked at me with a little twinkle in his eye, a man who'd been with him in his very first campaign in California, and he said to me, he said, Mike, people in this town forget it a lot, but he said, Ronald Reagan was a governor. And he said, we spent 8 years in Sacramento holding our hat in our hand, asking people in a far distant capital on the opposite shore of the country for the permission to use our resources in our state to confront the needs of our people. So it was central to what he thought. I believe it needs to be central to our national debate going forward. I mean, I truly do believe, as a conservative who believes in limited government and in the constitutional framework, that with new leadership on Capitol Hill and renewed leadership in Washington, D.C. in the coming years, we should demand not only that they put their fiscal house in order in Washington, D.C., but I believe that we should demand that new leadership in Washington, D.C. permanently reduce the size and scope of the federal government by restoring to the states the resources and the flexibility to solve problems for our people our way here at the state level. Now some say the next nominee of my party should be a governor, and I'm certainly sympathetic to that view. But all kidding aside, I'll tell you, it resonates with me, but what I'm listening for is not a person that says, send me to Washington and I'll go run Washington the way I ran my state. What I'm going to be listening for is that man or woman that says, send me to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to make it more possible for the next person running my state to run it with more freedom and more flexibility. That to me is the key. And that to me is something that's resonating. Second point I think we need to make, the key to doing all of this is, I think once we get our focus trained back on the states, then we need to start demanding of policymakers in both political parties that they craft solutions that will work and produce the results. And that's something we've been doing in Indiana for much of the last 10 years. We've been focused on making the hard choices and crafting real solutions that produce real results in the Hoosier State. And the truth is, in states across the country, and before the election, 29 Republican-led states have been leading the way in this regard. The statistics are kind of hard to argue with. Chief Executive Magazine in 2014 said the best states for business showed that 18 of the top 20 were states run by common-sense Republican governors, including all of the top 10. CNBC's 2014 top 5 states for business were all led by Republican governors. And Site Selection Magazine said the top 10 states for doing business were all led by the same. I don't make that as a partisan comment entirely. I really make that as an affirmation of there is an approach and a commitment to reform that's happening at the state levels, and with the election of Bruce Rauner, your new governor-elect, I believe can and should happen in Illinois as well. You know, in Indiana, under the last administration, we did a couple things in a row. First, we put our fiscal house in order. We made the hard choices to square the books. When I came into office, we focused on job creation and building momentum. With unemployment over 8%, we confronted a struggling economy by cutting taxes, reforming local taxes, and freezing regulation. Unemployment was over 8% when I came in. Just 2 years down the road here, it's 5.7%. We've added 83,000 net new jobs in the state of Indiana in our first 2 years, and our labor force has grown by the fifth highest number in the nation. 65,000 people have entered the labor force in the state of Indiana. It's because we've crafted solutions that make sense for inviting investment and capital formation in Indiana in ways that create jobs. When it comes to health care, we're looking to expand access to health care in Indiana, not through government mandates and taxes, but through the principles of consumer-driven health care and personal responsibility through the Healthy Indiana Plan. And we're building the roads of the future, north, south, and east and west, and even up in this neck of the woods, we hope, in the not-too-distant future, with innovative financing through public and private partnerships. You know, I love to tell people that, you know, we got a lot of signs coming to and fro to the border, but on our sign, Welcome to Indiana sign, it says Crossroads of America. And I always tell our team at the State House, if you're going to say you're the Crossroads of America, you better have the roads to back it up. And in the state of Indiana, we've rolled our sleeves up and used innovative solutions. And also, we've expanded school choice, and I believe that before our legislature adjourns in the next year, Indiana will be well on our way to being the first state in America to make career and vocational education a priority in every high school in our state again. You know, that's something that your governor-elect and I have talked with great passion about. He shares that vision. Governor Rick Snyder was just reelected on very much the same pledge. But 2 years ago when I was running, it was interesting as I traveled around the state of Indiana, going in and out of businesses in a state with more than 8% unemployment. I thought most of the people I'd stop and talk to in businesses would tell me that there were no jobs available. When just as often I heard business leaders tell me we can't find people to fill the jobs that we have. And that's what got me thinking about the idea of kind of going back to the future. I mean, when I was growing up down in that small town in southern Indiana, we'd all park in the same parking lot. When we go to high school, we'd walk through the same double doors. Some of us would turn left and go to AP English. And some would turn right and go back to what we call industrial arts. We ate in the same cafeteria. We cheered at the same basketball games, walked across the same stage. There was no plan A or plan B. It was two plan A's. And our schools worked for all of our kids, regardless of where they wanted to start in life, whether they were headed off to college or headed off to a career. And in the state of Indiana, working on a bipartisan basis, with the unanimous support of the Indiana General Assembly, we've moved legislation in each of the last 2 years to give us the tools to redesign career and technical and vocational education. And I urge you to consider that as well. I said at the top of my remarks, here in the Midwest, we do two things really well. We make things and we grow things, right? And so making sure that our educational institutions working in partnership with all of our post-secondary institutions, create pathways in high school for our young people to be able to step out into life and start on success where they want to start, I believe is a key to revitalizing not only my state, but revitalizing a heartland and revitalizing our entire country. Now, lastly, I would say that Indiana is hardly alone in this push for progress and innovation and reform. I recited some of the statistics, but I would just say to each one of you that the opportunity to bring about reform and change at the state level is profound. I mean, the truth is the founders of this country created a national government that was almost designed to be hard to get things done. And state governments, I've found in Indiana, you're able to operate on the basis of consensus, bring people together. In Indiana, we like to say you make job creation job one. And in the Hoosier State, we're focused on education, innovation, and reform, and having a four corners offense in our state. And we've been able to bring together people across the political spectrum to drive our state forward. And I have every confidence that our neighbors here in Illinois are going to be able to do that as well. But there's one other element that I want to close with today, and that is it has to do not with the policies, not with the focus, but with the attitude that we ought to bring to this challenge. I ultimately believe that leadership is about setting goals and also setting the tone, right? And, I like to say sometimes I'm a conservative, but, I'm not in a bad mood about it, right? Right? Is that okay? I mean, to be honest with you, I was really drawn to public life and drawn to this party of mine by the relentless optimism of not only that Illinoisan who became the 40th governor, but names like Jack Kemp, who would go on to be a very dear friend of mine and a mentor. I mean, all of you have these encounters as well. I remember I was at the Indiana State Fair this summer, and a man walked up to me, hat in hand, and kind of looked to the left and looked to the right, circles under his eyes, lower lip quivering a little bit. And he said, "Mike, I'm all for you. I support you the whole way." But he said, "Really, do you think the country's going to make it?" I mean, he had all the telltale signs of excessive cable television viewing. You know what I'm saying? Okay. And I just put my hand on his shoulder and I said, "Of course we're going to make it. We're Americans. We always make it." Now, we'll let Winston Churchill get away with this because his mother was an American, but he said it pretty well. He said, Winston Churchill said, "A careful study of American history shows that after they've exhausted every other possibility, the American people always do the right thing." So let's be confident. Let's have faith. Let's have faith in the American people. I mean, I have to tell you, I having worked out there in Washington a long time, there's an awful lot that's wrong with the national government. But we've got to stop confusing the national government with the nation. Okay? I would submit to you today that for all the faults that we have in government, the national level, and frustrations we may have in government at the state and local level, that the American people today are every bit as good and decent and hardworking and resilient and patriotic and generous as they have ever been in the history of this country. They haven't changed. We've just got to have government as good as our people again. It really came home to me in an anecdote I'll close with. Chris mentioned earlier, I made a living in radio in the 1990s in Indiana. And I was literally on about 20 radio stations all across the Hoosier State. Best 3-hour-a-day job I ever had. I was kind of like Rush Limbaugh on decaf. And, but it was 1998. The city of Indianapolis, which if you haven't visited recently, come on down and see us. You'll be impressed. The city of Indianapolis dedicated a memorial to all the Medal of Honor winners in the history of this great country. It's right on the canal. And we actually had the great privilege for 2 days of having in town every living Medal of Honor recipient in this country when we dedicated it in 1998. And on my little radio show, I was able for 3 hours a day for 2 days to sit and to interview these extraordinary Americans and to hear their story. And one of them was Jack Lucas. Jack was from North Carolina. He was a Marine. He served in Iwo Jima. Jack's story was just as extraordinary as any other Medal of Honor recipient's story. He was in a foxhole. Hand grenade came in. It was live. He jumped on it. It went off. And he saved the lives of everyone in that foxhole. When I asked him during the interview on live radio, I said, not trying to figure out exactly how he survived it, I said, "Why did you do it?" And he said, with a shrug, nonchalantly, he said, "It was my turn." Didn't hesitate. Extraordinary courage. Uncommon valor. And then our conversation took an interesting turn. And it's one that I'll never forget. I turned and looked at him. This was 1998. And so I was every bit of about 15, 16 years younger than I am now. And that much less informed. And I looked at him and I said, "Boy, you're a member of the greatest generation." So I said, "You must look around the country today in the 1990s and you're probably real worried about the youth these days, aren't you?" And all of a sudden, this very warm World War II veteran, his face suddenly turned to steel. And he looked at me with a glare And on the air, he said, "Son, you haven't got the first idea what you're talking about." It was on the air. And I said, well, why don't you film me, straighten me out or something? I was taken aback. And he said, "Let me tell you something, son." He said, those of us that grew up in the 1930s, he said, we partied every bit as much as kids do these days. We wasted as much time as kids do these days. He said, we were big as miscreants as some of the kids are these days. But he said, when the time came, we did what needed to be done because we're Americans. And kids these days will step up because they're Americans, and that's something you don't understand. Well, I was properly chastened. So time goes on. I ended up having the chance to serve in the Congress of the United States. My first year in office, I found myself on a sunny day in September on Capitol Hill, the 11th day of that month. I watched the billowing smoke rising from the Pentagon. I watched the horror of what happened in New York City and in that field in Pennsylvania. And then the next day, I saw lines on television going around the block in cities large and small all across this country as young people lined up to volunteer to put on the uniform of the United States. And I knew Jack was right, and I'd been wrong. He understood something about the American people that I didn't know then, but in my 10 trips downrange when I was in the Congress, when I visited soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq and onboard aircraft carriers, I'll tell you what, the men and women who step forward in this generation and put on the uniform are as fine a military force and as patriotic a group of Americans as has ever served in uniform in the history of this country. And they proved to me. And they proved to me we can be confident. We can be optimistic. We can be positive. It's all still there. In Indiana, I say with great humility, I hope in Indiana we've proved that if you step forward, if you make hard choices, if you produce government as good as your people, the people will stand behind you and growth and opportunity will happen from your economy to your schools. And as much as I like good competition across state lines, it's my fondest hope that this is increasingly true in every place in the Midwest, including here in Illinois. And let's have faith in the American people. And in this blessed time of the year, let's have faith in Him who placed this miracle of democracy on these wilderness shores. Because I know He's not done with America yet. I want to close just by saying, on the foundation of the good and strong people of this state and this great city, with a willingness to make tough choices, to craft state-based solutions, I know the best days for Illinois, for Indiana, for the Midwest, and for America are yet to come. And we in Indiana look forward to the competition. Thank you all very much, and God bless you. And may you have a truly blessed holiday season.
Thank you very much, Governor. I've got a couple of questions. If we've got these little question forms and people will pick them up from you and bring them down. So let's get right to it. Mark Weiermiller, a member of the City Club. Governor, have you any advice for Bruce Rauner, say on our pension mess, IRAs and 401ks? There you go. Okay. That's Mark's quick question for the governor of Indiana.
Gee, look at the time. Let me say, I mentioned your governor-elect. He and I have become acquainted over the last year and a half, and he is an individual of extraordinary capabilities. And I really have great confidence in his leadership. And I would just say, if Indiana is a model, that the opportunity I think that your governor-elect has is to marshal the strength of this state, tell people the truth about what the reality is, and make the hard choices and find a way forward. It can be done. but it takes leadership to do it. And in the state of Indiana, we, with soft revenues over the last 2 years since I became governor, we passed an honestly balanced budget 2 years ago, but quite frankly, with revenues off on more months than otherwise, we had to manage those resources to maintain our budget reserves, and that means making hard choices. So I think to the extent that that your new governor steps forward and just speaks the truth, I know the good common sense people of this state are going to be willing to come alongside, hear the truth, and move forward. That's the only counsel I would give, and frankly, I have every confidence that he's going to do just that. I haven't heard a round of applause for Bruce Rauner yet, but I'd take it. I'm very excited about his new leadership here in Illinois.
And we have an invitation into the governor-elect, and we're hoping to hear back this afternoon. And we're knock on wood. Okay. John Gates, City Club member. Now, Governor, this relates directly to your essay on federalism. John Gates says, the federal government has begun prohibiting certain recreational uses of Indiana waterways and Lake Michigan. The federal government bases its authority to do so on a letter signed by a prior governor of Indiana. Will you continue to support giving the federal government this authority, or do you support returning that authority to the state? No easy question.
Well, let me say, sandbag here a lot. Okay. Let me say that we're, working with our community leaders from in Northwest Indiana, who I referenced earlier. We just recognize the enormous potential that the entire dunes and lakeshore area holds in Northwest Indiana, and we're exploring ways to continue to develop that in ways that are going to strengthen the entire region. I would say, without making specific reference to John, your question on that policy, we are always interested, and will continue to be interested, whether it's healthcare issues or transportation issues or education issues, to gain the greatest flexibility from the federal government in the use of our resources and the use of our lands and our waterways, and we'll continue to pursue that. But working in a collaborative way, I'm very excited about what's happening at the dunes. I was mentioning before, we've got some exciting things happening that are going to be, we think, bringing all new investment into the area and into the state park area, and creating even greater destinations. I've already talked to a number of people in the room who own places in Northwest Indiana and spend a fair amount of time in the year there, and we encourage you to encourage you with the word that it's getting better every day because of the great local leadership that we have, and we'll work hard to make sure our federal partners give us the flexibility to maximize that the Indiana way.
Okay. In regards to the Crossroads of America, we've got 3 questions about transportation that I'm going to sort of put together from Milt Sees and Peter Scozzi, both members of the City Club, and then Glenn Campbell of Patrick Engineering. This question has to do with the Ileana Tollway project, thoughts from your side of the border, as well as what Illinois can learn from Indiana's use of innovative financing for infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that our project on the other end of the state, the East End Bridge project near Louisville, was named the Project of the Year as a public-private partnership. We used not only P3 for financing, but we used a P3 to market the bonds for the bridge. And it is, I'm happy to report to the legislators in the room, it continues to be under budget and ahead of schedule. And we're going to get it done and get it done on time. I think the issue of infrastructure is so key. I just think roads mean jobs. And while at least one of the questions came from an engineering firm, I don't really mean road jobs. I don't mean design jobs. I mean, if you have the right infrastructure, you can create an environment that will naturally invite the kind of investment that will take advantage of the fact that we are the heartland of the country. And so one of the things that we did in the state of Indiana this year was I asked a key logistics CEO and my lieutenant governor to put together a panel of leading experts in a broad range of logistics area, not just roads and bridges, but a broad range of logistics, and design really a 50-year plan in the state of Indiana to start a conversation with our policymakers. I told them first, it's kind of like Christmas shopping. Don't worry about what it costs, right? Just tell me what you want, right? I just told them, I said, go tell us what it should look like. And what I said to them very simply was 50 years from now, if you take a picture of outer space, I want all roads to lead to Indiana, right? That's subtle, right? So, I said, tell me what that's got to look like in terms of land and water and air. And we came up with a blueprint that is a public document and you can consider and look at. But I'm someone that really believes that long-range planning is a way that you can begin to marshal a consensus around what needs to be done, because it is other than public safety and the education of our children, infrastructure has to be among the most important. Taking care of what you got, finishing what you started, and planning and building for the future. I would say with regard to Ileana, Indiana's all in. We're ready to go. That's been a project that I know has been a source of some controversy here in the greater Chicago area, and it's been a subject of debate. It's gone through a few hurdles. I am not as aware on this side of the border of the issues that are being worked through, but I can tell anyone interested in that project in the room that we're ready to build it from the Indiana border forward. And when you think about and this is a proposal I think that first emerged decades ago, that we would move some of the 18-wheel heavy truck traffic south of Chicago to be able to intercept with I-65, so that then we could begin to realize places like Gary and LaPorte and Merrillville and other places on our side of the border could begin to realize on even a greater potential for ease in commuting into the Chicagoland area is an idea I think, at least we think on our side of the border, is an idea whose time has come. We'll leave it to policymakers here in Illinois and your new governor to sort through that. But if he asks you on the street, what did Pence say about Ileana, tell him Indiana's ready to go.